Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this afternoon's presentation. The third day of our Gale Conference, Generative AI in Libraries. I am Selwyn Rodolfo, the moderator for this session. Before we begin, we have a few reminders. One, code of conduct. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference. The link is posted in chat, or I will post it in a few moments. If you experience any issue related to conduct, please contact us via email. That too will be shared via chat. The muting of microphones. Please ensure your microphone remains muted. Question and answers. During the Q&A, do wait until you are invited to unmute before posing your question or comment. For captions, you can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Please note that this session is being recorded. The presenters for this session are Christine Slaughter, Maggie Nunley, and Eric Purple. Along with Jen Huck, this team co-created the presentation. The three presenters are from the University of Virginia Library. Christine is a social science research librarian. Maggie and Eric are both science and engineering research librarians. And Jen is the Associate Director of Research Data Service and Social, Natural, and Engineering Sciences. The title of their presentation is, You Know What Happens When You Assume. AI Use and Students at the University of Virginia. That's the subtitle. So let's welcome our presenters.
Hey, thanks, Selwyn. So I'm kicking it off. The first thing we wanted to share was a little bit about UVA. So you have a sense of our size and our number of students. And I think in addition to our stats about UVA, the main thing you need to know is we do not use Turnitin. We rely completely and entirely on an honor code, which is going to become relevant when we talk about the results of the survey that we did. So next slide. So I'm sure this isn't uncommon or unexpected for any of you. When AI showed up on the scene, there was immediate panic about what we were going to do, how this was going to impact higher education, everything. And when we were having meetings at all levels with other staff, with faculty, with administration, a number of assumptions came to the top. And those were students are already using AI. They're using it for everything, no matter what we tell them. They're better at generative AI than we are, and we desperately need to catch up. So that was the thing that we kept hearing over and over in meetings. So next slide. And this wasn't unique to UVA either. You all have probably seen the 2024 EDUCAUSE AI landscape study. I pulled one of the figures from that study about primary motivators for strategic planning around AI, and the number one that everyone listed was the concern that there will be a rise of student use of AI in their courses. So we were not alone in this concern of like, we have to meet the students, they're already using this. And I think that had a couple of unintended consequences. The first being that in a lot of the conversations that the students were hearing from us about higher ed and courses and coursework and generative AI, they were hearing that our main concern was that they were going to cheat. And that kind of consumed the conversation for students. Next slide. The other thing, and I think this will be a little bit more stark if you're like me and you're also an elder millennial, is there seemed to be this like startup of the conversation around the digital divide, and particularly about digital natives. which if you're not familiar with that term, it was this idea that anyone born after 1980 was somehow magically and inherently better at technology because we were surrounded by it than anyone that was born before 1980. And I think that this assumption that the students are somehow automatically better at generative AI than the rest of us is part of this belief of digital natives. All right, next slide. So the last piece of this is I attended the Teaching with AI conference in Florida back in September, and this was one of the studies that was presented. Petrosini and Wu did a study of Penn State students and faculty and their perceptions around generative AI. And I think one of the things that's really striking about this study is that the students and the faculty agreed far more often than they disagreed. Like the alignment was really interesting. And one of the conclusions the researchers had is that students want instruction on AI use. And I think that's also an indicator that what we're assuming about them is not what is actually happening. All right. So we decided after all of this information that our team was just going to ask students about AI. And we felt that it wasn't just that someone at the university should ask students, but specifically we as librarians should ask, because we don't set policy, we don't grade them, we're here to support their learning. And we thought we could leverage our unique relationship with students to ask them to be really honest with us about their use of AI tools. So here's the survey that we came up with. It is fairly basic. We just asked for their year and their major. We asked them if they use generative AI tools, the purpose of their use, which tools they use. We asked specifically how they use AI tools for schoolwork. We asked some confidence questions in their use of those AI tools. And then for the students that don't use AI tools, we asked why and what would help them become more comfortable to use generative AI tools. So we put this survey together. And we decided we wanted this to go really quickly. So we wanted to kind of strike in the fall last year and catch all the students where they were. So we didn't go and get IRB approval. We just used this internally in our work as librarians and to inform the services in the library. In order to share the survey, we hosted 4 in-person sessions so that students could come and fill out the survey, but also chat with us about how they were using ChatGPT. And we invited them to show us cool things that they were using generative AI to do. And as a carrot to get them into those sessions, we gave away cookies and pizza. And we found that saying cookie for a survey worked incredibly well to draw students in. And because of those giveaways, we ended up getting 177 responses for our survey. And I'll hand it over to Eric to talk about the results.
Thanks. Right. So these are the results of our survey. So this isn't everything we got, but we tried to draw some interesting conclusions out from them. So first of all, we wanted to know who these people are and not identifying information, but just a general profile of who the students are, what year they are. So most of them were first years, and a quirk of the University of Virginia is that we don't say freshman, sophomore, junior. We say first year, second year. But anyway, first year is equivalent to a freshman. So most of the students were undergrads, and most of those were first years. We did have some grad students and other people as well. Next slide. And then we asked them what their major was. So we set up shop in front of the Science and Engineering Library at UVA. We have a handful of libraries around the university. So naturally, in front of the Science and Engineering Library, you might expect more students in science and engineering departments. So our most common respondent was from computer science, but we also got people from around in other departments as well, other science and engineering departments. We got some people from the social sciences, some humanities, a few from things like, well, basically business and law, things like that. So it was skewed towards students in science and engineering majors. Next slide. We asked them, are they using AI or generative AI specifically? 2/3 said yes, and the vast majority of those said they're using ChatGPT. It was by far the dominant response as to which tool they're using. Those that were not using it, and I'll talk more about this next, but they were afraid that it would be an honor code violation. So I'll talk more about that in the following slide. Next slide, please. Following up on, so for those that do use AI tools, why do they use it? So if you look at the bottom, most common responses, well, the most common response was for homework and studying, but like classwork related responses were the most common. So those two at the bottom, coursework without faculty approval and coursework with faculty approval, adding those to the for studying and homework support section, most students are using it for class related purposes. Next slide. So I briefly said earlier that 98% of our respondents that were using AI are using ChatGPT. At least this was fall 2023. We asked them, what is their confidence in selecting a tool that meets your needs? And this was on a scale of 1 to 5. So the most common response was like a pretty confident 4 that ChatGPT met the needs of what they were looking for. We don't know yet if that was because they just thought ChatGPT is synonymous with generative AI or they weren't aware of other tools out there, but they felt pretty confident that ChatGPT met their needs. Next slide. And I'm sure as you all are aware, there's a lot of fretting in academic circles about interpreting the results from something like ChatGPT or other generative AI sources. It can sometimes create false information or have biases, things like that. So we asked students, what is your confidence in evaluating the output from these generative AI tools? The most common response was, again, a 4, pretty confident. So students were fairly confident they were interpreting the results correctly from these AI tools. So like I said earlier, about 2/3 of the students used AI. Of the students that did not use generative AI tools, so this is about 1/3 of our respondents, we asked them, why not? So the most common response was that it would be a violation of the honor code, so at the university, we have a clearly stated honor code that is in writing in every classroom on the wall. There's also online resources stating clearly, what's in the honor code, things like that. But it is vague language, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Another, prominent category in this response here was that they just didn't see the appeal or just weren't really interested in using generative AI, which goes against the narrative that these students are using it for everything, whether it's for personal use, cheating on class assignments, etc. About 20% of those respondents that didn't use AI just weren't really that interested. Next slide. So when asked what would help you become more comfortable in learning or using generative AI tools, so as I said earlier, the honor code at the University of Virginia is prominently displayed in classrooms. Also, students said one thing that would help them become more comfortable, or the most common response to that question, was clear guidance on use and honor implications. So as I said, the honor code adopted by UVA is very vague, particularly when it comes to generative AI use and tools. It's very vague and non-specific on how you're allowed to use it, what you can use it for, things like that. So it's natural that students would ask for guidance on that. Next slide. And then my last few results here, these are sort of the flip side. We asked students about how they're using generative AI, but also their opinions on how, what they would think if faculty were using it in various capacities. So we asked them how would they feel about faculty using generative AI to create course content. The most common response was moderately uncomfortable. but there were a fair number that were comfortable with that as well. So kind of a scattering of opinions. Next slide. And then I found this a little bit contradictory, but we asked, how would students feel about faculty using generative AI as a teaching assistant? And the most common response was moderately comfortable. So it seemed a little contradictory to me that they felt comfortable with Gen AI being used as a teaching assistant, but not in creating course materials. And I believe they're referring to, faculty are considering using Gen AI as like a course chatbot with some guardrails on it and things like that. Next slide. And then we asked students how they would feel about faculty using generative AI to grade student work. So naturally, the most common response was very uncomfortable. So this definitely elicited a strong negative response to students using Gen AI to grade student work. Yeah, not many students were comfortable with this, automation or sort of outsourcing, if you will, of grading student work. Next slide.
All right, and I am here to talk a little bit about kind of the free text qualitative responses that we solicited in the survey. So who doesn't love a word cloud, right? So I just popped all the text responses into NVivo, generated this word cloud of how do you use AI tools for schoolwork? So obviously help and understand are big ones here. I think it's interesting to kind of, if you had the actual NVivo project, you would be able to drill down into specific mentions of things, but this is just a very broad overview of kind of what are the different conceptual things, different areas of inquiry that people are saying they use or don't use AI for. All right. So this, I'm not going to belabor this and read the whole thing, but this one quote from a student, "It's a last resort for me and I feel ashamed of using it," versus "My class makes me use it for ideation and brainstorming." I thought this was a really kind of illustrative example of the kind of range, this universe of big feelings about AI. Some people are just they have this kind of deep anxiety over it, which I think is again connected to the culture of the honor code at UVA. And then we also have "My class makes me use it." So if my class is telling me to use it, I'm going to use it, which I feel is kind of interesting, this range of engagements with AI. And then last thing I did is pulled a few different examples of how students are characterizing their engagement with AI. "Help with tasks that will not help me learn." I found this interesting simply because there's an assumption that they know what is going to help them learn versus what is not going to help them learn, which students are not always the best judge of that, I think we would say. Personal TA, which I think resonates with the results that Eric talked about earlier regarding using Gen AI as kind of a TA in classes. We have really nitty-gritty kind of results like grammar, word replacements, rewording things I don't understand. We also have kind of checking for big picture ideas. So kind of there's a variety of different ways that students can engage in AI. We also have just kind of logistical transcription of audio recordings of lectures and organizing the transcript into notes and creating outlines. Really kind of logistical stuff like cutting down their word count in their essays. And a final few remarks. Unfortunately, when I try for schoolwork, the answers are incorrect. So again, we have students are not uncritical, just blank slates that are going to hear, "Oh, AI is great, use it for everything." They have like an actual kind of critical mindset that can assess what kinds of results they're getting. And also, and the final remark, "To help learn information since I find it performs better than Google for complex concepts," which I think is is a really interesting illustration of how they're putting it on the same ChatGPT in essence. They're putting it on the same plane as Google. They're comparing it with search engines, with other kind of information tools that are out there. And they're making these assessments about what is better for different kinds of information needs. So I think that really, just in closing, I think that really illustrates that students are not these blank slates who are just going to hear that they can use AI to cheat and be like, great, and proceed from there. They really have a varyingly critical mindset, a varyingly kind of emotional and anxious mindset about what these tools mean and what these tools give to them. And so I think we will leave it there. And if anyone thank you so much for your time. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to speak up. Or I don't know if Selwyn's going to moderate that portion of things if there are questions.
No, you feel free to go ahead if you, as you engage with the attendees, but we do have one question in the question and answer.
All right, let's see.
Segment. You can have a look at it, yes.
Okay, so missed part of the beginning was Zoom issues. So was the survey just undergrads? It was not just undergrads, but we set up outside of a science and engineering library where there was a lot of undergrad traffic. So there was, it was predominantly undergrads with a few grad students. And Maggie, did you have anything to add?
Nope, I was ready to hop in if you needed me.
All right, great. All right, any other questions, comments?
Right, did we look at the difference between grad and other students and the undergrads? We didn't, because this was kind of we wanted to strike while the iron was hot and kind of get this first take from the group of students that we could get to answer the survey. Our plan going forward is we're actually going to go through IRB and we're going to do a bigger series of surveys where we can get enough data to compare majors and also grad students to undergrads to get a sense of if there's a change in how they're using it and, you know, at what rates they're using generative AI. So that's kind of like in the process. But this was mainly our attempt to kind of get a snapshot of what was actually happening with students right now. Maggie also asked, how do you plan to use this information? So it's been wildly helpful in forming a lot of our conversations internally in the library. When we have meetings with our faculty and with other people, we've been able to say, hey, we did a survey and it turns out only 2/3 of the students are using generative AI and they're overwhelmingly using ChatGPT and no one even knows what Gemini is. So it's been really helpful in that context. Eric and I put together a starting workshop because we were kind of stressing ourselves out with thinking that like we needed to go really deep on like query engineering and like all of these concepts. And once we got the results of the survey, we realized, no, we just need to, we hosted, like literally the workshop was AI tools that are not ChatGPT. That was the title of the workshop. And we just talked about all of the other ones. And we had a good turnout. And a lot of people were like, I only ever hear about ChatGPT because I think it consumes so much media time that no one's heard about anything else. So just demoing some of the ones from Google and Meta, and even some smaller ones, most people had not heard of any of them. So yeah, that's kind of where we started with it.
Yeah, and I think it just highlights the need for people who are studying generative AI or looking into it for practical considerations, making distinctions between what generative AI is more broadly and specifically the affordances of ChatGPT, I think is really important to make that distinction.
Yeah, it was our first inkling that generative AI and ChatGPT meant the same thing for a lot of people.
And we also have a question, were these results shared with stakeholders beyond the library, faculty, administrators, etc.? If so, what were their reactions? And I think Maggie and Eric are probably in a better position to answer that than I am.
Yeah. So I'm on a provost committee about AI, and generally they were shocked. It was absolutely not the thought that they had. And UVA had gone with the policy that we weren't going to have an overarching policy around AI. It was going to be left up to each and every individual faculty member. We're like herding cats over here. So, particularly they hadn't considered the student perspective of if you're in 6 different classes, you have 6 possibly dramatically different AI policies to deal with. So the fact that the students were just like, a third of them were being like, nope, don't have time, find it stressful, just going to ignore that generative AI exists. That was really surprising to them. And even the faculty, I think, were feeling more adversarial about generative AI. And I've really been pushing the narrative of like, no, the students want to have these hard conversations about generative AI. They want to talk about the environmental impacts, and they want to talk about the ethical concerns, and they want to talk about like what it means in an academic setting. And I think that's been able to help us push back against this narrative that, well, the students are already using it. We're going to have to, beat them back from using it for everything. So it's opened up a little bit more in terms of telling the faculty that like, no, you can actually have these conversations with students. They are desperate to have these conversations and understand where you're coming from. So I don't know, for Eric, I have more writing classes. Eric has more technical classes.
No, I think you covered it, but I would say anecdotally, like Maggie said, people are just assuming, people meaning faculty, staff, administrators, they're just assuming that students are using it all the time for everything, which really doesn't turn out to be the case so much, or at least not in this past fall semester.
I will say, I think there's, if we don't have any open questions right now, I think there is kind of a big, obviously there's a variety of different ethical concerns, environmental, labor, copyright and intellectual property. I think there's, given that one of the more frequent uses, it seems, of students using generative AI is to kind of feed articles into Chat GPT and have them summarize things. I think that's a big kind of intellectual property issue that wouldn't necessarily immediately occur to them. And I think that's potentially another area for education and instruction regarding.
Yeah. Yeah, we also accidentally surfaced a problem. The students were using a tool that we had never heard of called otter.ai. That records lectures and does a phenomenal job at transcripts and then automatically creating notes from those lectures. But the students were using it for their classes and not informing anyone else that they were using this tool, which is actually a violation of the recording policy at UVA, which, the undergrads didn't know we had a recording policy. They didn't think about that the lecture is the faculty member's intellectual property. It never occurred to them to ask for permission to do this. So one of the kind of things that came up was that we found some things that we're like, oh, we actually need to do some education and highlight these concerns, because the students just don't know, because we've been so obsessed with talking about them cheating that we didn't think to talk about intellectual property and like the ways in which they needed to, go about their use in a really thoughtful way. So that was just missed, and is something that we need to work on.
Yeah, there's an assumption, I think, that cheating is the big, like the elephant in the room that we need to address. But with some of the more, kind of quote unquote benign uses of AI, there's really room for nuancing and complexity there that we need to address too.
Has IT been a factor? And I'm not sure if this is the answer you're going for, Kathy, but it's probably worth mentioning that University of Virginia is a Microsoft campus, and at some point, so they've licensed Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI platform, generative AI platform, and now we have a thing called UVA Copilot, which is basically like Copilot, but with guardrails. It's, it's not tracking personal information and things like that. So I'm not aware of anything being blocked, but I know our IT, campus-wide IT is definitely pushing people to use Copilot, which is our licensed Microsoft.
Yeah, the guidance that they're using right now is that if the AI platform asks for any unique information and we consider like student email and phone numbers, personal information, then we can't ask the students to use the tool. So if it's like free and anonymous, that's fine. And then we're also developing guidelines on students' intellectual property. Can you ask a student to upload their paper to an AI tool? And right now we've gone with no, you can't. They can do it of their free will, but you can't ask them to do it as part of a class or an assignment. So that's created some interesting considerations for the faculty. Maggie also asked, do you think that the honor code might allow for use of otter.ai for accessibility reasons? And yeah, absolutely. So the policy at UVA is just that you need to inform everyone that you're recording. I know that there's at least one faculty member that announced that he was using this tool and he was going to record every single one of his lectures and he would share it with the students, and that's totally fine, absolutely within the limits of the policy. The thing with the honor code is because AI is so out of left field of how the students would use it that there's no guidance. And they've really struggled with coming up with guidance for the students because the honor committee is all made up of students. So it's a student-run organization to check student behavior. So they're really struggling because some of the faculty want students to use it, some of the faculty ban it. And I know that they had talked about just making like, if you use generative AI, that is cheating. And that very quickly got shut down because some faculty, including the computer science department, were like, no, you can't unilaterally declare that because we actually ask our students to use this. So they've really struggled with what are the guardrails that they could put in place for students because we're kind of just varying from class to class right now. So yeah, it's something that we're still struggling with, and I think the students are still struggling with because, the STEM kids are using it for a lot of things, and then the depending on what major you talk to, the attitude is completely different. Like the English department is in absolute turmoil over use of it. It has a very different approach than any of the engineering.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that you can maybe what's going on with admin is a little bit thinking that, oh, if I think this way, then the students must think this way, because there's a lot of admin that's kind of gung-ho. We're all in on this AI stuff. We're getting contracts with Microsoft, like, let's go for it. And without kind of necessarily considering some of the like implications and critical perspectives on it. So I'm wondering if that might be kind of like, well, we're thinking this way, we're completely gung-ho, so why wouldn't the students also be completely gung-ho? But maybe that's a cynical take.
If I may interject here, there's this question on the use of the transcription tool. I think about 3 persons have addressed it. The question here, do you think that the honor code might allow use of Otter AI for accessibility reasons if it goes through the right office or the right bureaucracy?
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
comments on that?
Yeah, our accessibility office is actually really excited about some of these tools and getting them vetted. It's just that balance of ethical use and making things aware. And then, yeah, Glenn pointed out that there are tools that attach itself to meetings without anyone realizing. So I think that's just something we're going to have to balance. It's a new consideration for a post-generative AI world.
And we have a comment in the chat. We have Copilot 2 and are encouraged to use that and discouraged from uploading research data sets to protect IP. That's interesting that
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I
Yeah.
mean, from my perspective, it seems like there are almost different standards being used, like, oh, use Copilot, use AI, use that stuff. And or do you mean up or discouraged from uploading research data sets into Copilot? I may have misunderstood.
Yeah, I think UVA is part of the group that they're really hoping to license the algorithm so that we own the algorithm and everything that goes into it. So it's like a self-contained system that Microsoft can't leverage outside of us. But yeah, we're kind of running into that too, of like we're being encouraged to use Copilot, but there's a lot of questions people have about like if you're working on a conference presentation or like, should we use it for our work or, what are the limitations? And those are still developing, as with everything with AI right now.
And Kathy says that they're discouraged from uploading research data sets into Copilot, which is interesting and more conservative than I think at least I have come to expect from some of these policies. But I think that's promising, at least that those issues are being considered. Do we have any more questions or comments, or if anyone's done any similar work at their institution and have interesting results,
If I may add another comment here.
Yeah.
So a survey was conducted among students. Do you see the need to do something similar among the faculty and maybe take on that role as the library being the sort of intermediary in
I
that
don't
whole
know that we
exchange
could.
between the student and the faculty?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we could as easily bribe faculty with food, but maybe. I mean, I think with faculty, there's going to be I think a survey would be a great idea. I think when you're soliciting folks to respond, you're going to get maybe a skewed data set because some faculty are really interested in talking about AI and have a lot of opinions and a lot of things to say. And then you get less representation of the folks who maybe haven't thought about it as deeply or have more less pointed opinions on AI. So I don't know, Maggie, Eric, what do y'all think?
Yeah, I feel like the student portion has been the more interesting focus, which is why we started with it. We're definitely aware and involved in the turmoil that the faculty are experiencing it, and figuring out like how is this going to fit in their work, how is this going to change their teaching. But I think that's like the experience that they're having is really common. And we're being pretty loud about it. So it's not like it's hard to find how faculty feel about generative AI in any aspect of our work or its impact on higher education. It's really the students that we didn't understand like how they were feeling about it. And we knew some things and we're seeing some impacts, like we're having a huge crush of computer science students that are trying to graduate a year early because they're terrified they won't have a job if they wait 2 years because of generative AI. So we're seeing some indications, but really digging into their experience of this new tool when they've really been central to the conversation about how it's going to impact higher education, I think is primarily our focus and what we're going to continue in our surveys going into the fall of this year.
Do we have a faculty group focused on AI issues? Maggie, you might want to talk about that university-wide group that were a part of.
Yeah.
Provost.
So we do. The faculty senate here at UVA has been really keenly interested in all things AI. Again, because of the like decentralized way in which UVA approaches things, a lot of policies and conversations have been kind of limited to departmental or at best school-wide. But I am on a committee that was formed by the provost's office, basically with an eye towards supporting faculty for generative AI. So part of the group's work is building our own internal training tools for faculty about what AI is. And then we're working on a lot of like, here are how people are using it in their classes, like faculty at UVA live right now, kind of giving an example of like ways in which this can be leveraged. So that's been the main thing, and that's been really interesting just to see the faculty that are trying to figure out, you know, what are the guardrails the students need, what work really well, what doesn't. Most of it has been work with the students, although we have a few faculty members that are starting the work of like generating course materials using generative AI, which is going to be really interesting considering the student reaction that our survey got, which is something I've also been showing faculty of like, don't think you can get away with grading their work with generative AI. They loathed that idea. And, you know, I think it's nice to kind of give faculty something that the students hate about generative AI, because that's been really useful. But yeah, we're kind of approaching it with supporting the faculty in exploring how this is going to impact their specific course, their work, the students that they work with. So it's a work in progress.
All right, any final questions or comments? And if not, maybe we can, you know, give back people 4 minutes. Thank you, Maggie.
Yes, so thank you to the team. If there are no further questions or comments from the floor as such. So thank you, Christine, Maggie, and Eric for your presentation and for sharing with us the details of your survey and some of the practical comments you've received and practical implications both for students and for faculty and even for the work of the library. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone in the chat and the audience for attending and engaging. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So our next series of sessions begin in about 18 minutes at 2 p.m. Okay, so see you all in one of those sessions. Pleasant evening, pleasant day to all. Bye.